I don't know what Donald Trump has to do with South African land because he's never been here. And he must keep his America. We will keep our South Africa. That is what he must do. South Africa is our land. South Africa belongs to all the people who live here in South Africa. It does not belong to Donald Trump. He can keep his America. He must leave us alone. Stay out of our issues.
Imagine waking up one day and finding strangers in your home. No, they are not just visiting. They have decided your house is now theirs. And they take up your bedrooms and force you into their backyard. Well, that's what exactly happened to black South Africans in their homeland. It all started in 1652 when the Dutch arrived at the Cape, pretending they were just stopping by, but instead they stayed. They took over and expanded at the expense of the indigenous Scotian people. And fast forward, the British joined the colonization party in the 19th century, and what followed was a land dispossession on a massive scale. Black South Africans had to carry passbooks, basically permission slips, to carry around their own country. And if you didn't have the right papers, you could be arrested. Not for stealing, not for fighting, but just for existing in the wrong place. And the rules, ridiculous. Black people couldn't live in certain areas. You couldn't vote, couldn't use white-only toilets. Yes, you heard me. There were white-only toilets. Imagine having to hold it in just because the nearest bathroom was for white people only. Schools were inferior. Jobs were limited. Interracial marriages were not even allowed at all. It was an entire system designed to keep black people poor, powerless, and at the mercy of white rulers.
We were very, very scared. The police were saying, whether you like it or not, you will be moved.
Under the Group Areas Act, the attempt is now to separate out your Cape Coloured people, your mixed bloods, your Indian group, your African group. This is apartheid. Yeah. It's a big apart.
And while black South Africans suffered, the country's wealth, gold and diamonds, land, was being exploited by the whites for profit.
60 to 70,000 people were pulled out of their homes by force.
We had just finished having supper when we had a big knock at the door. They came with these big government trucks. And then after it was loaded, they told us, "Clement the truck. You just have to follow the rules," what they were saying, so that nobody in your family gets injured or killed.
Yet, despite this cruelty, black South Africans fought back. Resistance movements rose. Voices refused to be silenced. And by the early 1990s, the pressure, both local and international, became too much to ignore. Apartheid was dismantled. Nelson Mandela was freed from prison. And in 1994, South Africa finally held its first democratic elections.
This is my last message addressed to the people of South Africa. I, without qualification, apologize for the pain and the hurt and the indignity and the damage that apartheid has done to black, brown and Indians in South Africa.
So in order to solve South Africans' land problem, their current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, introduced a land law allowing land expropriation without compensation in cases it serves the public interest. And this is why Trump is angry, because suddenly South Africans are attempting to correct a 200-year-old crime done to them.
Happening in South Africa, they're taking away land, they're confiscating land, and actually they're doing things that are perhaps far worse than that.
Donald Trump, in his usual fashion, decided to throw a tantrum on Twitter, accusing South Africa of confiscating land and treating certain classes of people unfairly. If you didn't know the history, you might think he was standing up for human rights. No, his sudden concern wasn't just about justice.
And I would be surprised if President Donald Trump himself has actually read the act, because the act does not refer to race.
It was about the white landowners, who despite being only 8% of the population still controls about 75% of South Africans' farmland. And instead of acknowledging that this imbalance comes from centuries of colonial rule and apartheid, Trump painted white South Africans as persecuted victims in need of protection.
Well, we'll see what happens, but the South African situation is very, very dangerous and very bad for a lot of people. There's tremendously bad things going on, including the confiscation of property, and worse, much worse than that. You know what I'm talking about.
The behavior of President Trump towards South Africa now I really can't explain it. I find it very, very difficult to understand it.
But the irony here is that America is doing the same exact thing. Under their Fifth Amendment Act, the U.S. government can seize private property for public use. If a road needs to be constructed, if land is needed for development, the state can take it, sometimes with little or no compensation. So, Mr. Trump, where was your outrage when Native Americans' lands were seized for pipelines?
We will not be deterred. We are, as South Africans, a resilient people, and we will not be bullied. There are some in this house today who have memories of their families being forcibly removed from their land. The people of this country know the pain of forced removal. That is why we will never allow forced removals again in this country.
And just when you thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, Elon Musk jumped in. The South African-born billionaire who hasn't lived in the country for decades called the land law reform racist and accused the government of targeting whites. This is the same Elon Musk whose family benefited from the apartheid era. But a funny aspect of this whole issue is that Donald Trump is granting a refugee status to white South Africans. Imagine giving refugee status to people that have their own homes and are of one of the wealthiest, most privileged minority in the country. But here is where it even gets funnier. The Afrikaners rejected Trump's offer. That's right, you heard me. The very people he tried to rescue told him they are not interested.
We might disagree with the ANC, but we love the country. As in any community, there are individuals who wish to immigrate, but the repatriation of Afrikaners as refugees is not a solution for us. We want to build a future in South Africa.
We have to state categorically, we don't want to move elsewhere. We are not going to ask our children now to move to another country. The fact is, our ancestors worked hard to make sure that we as a people are formed down the southern tip of Africa. We're not going to disrespect that.
Despite their cries of persecution, white South Africans are still among the wealthiest people in the country. They own the farms, the businesses, and the estates. And they are not running away from war or oppression. They are just reluctant, or they just don't want to share.
This is not the time for any of us to rush off to foreign lands to lay complaints about issues that we ourselves can solve here in this country.
Some critics argue that Trump's land reform outrage is just a cover-up for the real cause of his anger towards South Africa. Many believe it is because, 1, South Africa joined BRICS, a global alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which is gradually reducing the US dollar and changing the Western economic dominance. And 2, South Africa took Israel to the International Criminal Court over its war on Gaza, accusing it of genocide, something Trump and the US strongly oppose.
If they don't give us money, let's not give them minerals.
As we come to the end of this video, one thing is clear. Though the scars remain, generations of systematic oppression don't just disappear overnight. Today, you can still see the economic and social impact of apartheid in South Africa's wealth distribution, their land ownership, and racial inequalities. And the most bitter part is that all of this happened in their own country, a land that they had lived before a single European foot ever touched African soil. Kindly tell me what you think. Kindly drop your thoughts and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. And most importantly, remember, Jesus loves you. Yes, I mean you.